The world is likely to exceed that critical threshold of 1.5 degrees of warming in at least one of the next 5 years. That's according to the UN's climate monitoring body. And Minister for the Environment, Climate and Communications, Eamon Ryan, joins us this morning. Minister, your reaction to we keep hearing for a number of years now that what we needed to avoid was this 1.5. We needed to not exceed it. We needed to not hit it, and that's where all our reduction of emissions has been aimed at. But it looks like we're going to hit it anyway. What's your reaction?
Oh, it's truly frightening. And the latest science, it only came out yesterday. Um, the Copernicus, which is the European agency monitoring climate, that last month was the 12th month in a row globally, which was a record. There'd never been a warmer May, there's never been a warmer April, never been a warmer March. And we are in the last 12 months over 1.5 degrees. And just to explain, I suppose, why the 1.5 degrees, that's the average global increase in temperatures. And the concern scientists have is that by going over that limit, you risk some tipping points where you start to get runaway climate change. In other words, maybe the ice sheets reduce in a way that allows further heat to be reflected or not reflected off, but kept. And that then gets a feedback loop, which you can't
Okay.
stop. Now, we may come back down under 1.5 again in the next year or two, because some of that was caused by the El Nino effect. But the science is truly, and what the scientists are worried about is that it has jumped in the last year in a way that no
It's
one expected.
accelerating,
That
isn't
is, yeah,
it?
it's a dramatic increase
Okay.
and it's increase in average air temperature, but also particularly worrying is the water temperature, global water temperatures. And so that's why it's of such concern and why we do have to respond and act with all our might.
Okay, and I'm looking at some of the things we're going to respond and act with, and it looks extremely expensive. A 1.3 billion package of flood relief plans by 2030, up to 4 billion might be spent bringing 4 billion spent bringing water from the Shannon to Dublin. 250 million needed to safeguard the Dublin Rosslare rail line, which is actually very close to where I live and has actually previously fallen into the sea, although it was about 100 years ago. How are we going to realistically and pragmatically afford the kinds of investment that we're going to need to mitigate against these things?
We need two things. That word mitigate is one of the things we need to do. We need to reduce the amount of emissions, which actually stops the problem, stops increasing pollution. But also we need to adapt. And I went to government yesterday. We had a framework in terms of how we adapt. Some of the investments we need to make will be adapting to climate change that's coming inevitably. We
Okay.
can't stop. And
So
one
that's
of
the
the things,
mitigation and the monies that we're
well, no,
spending
the
on.
adaptation is where, adapting to climate change. On that one of the ways we can do it, in my mind, and I was arguing this in Cabinet yesterday, is that we can do a lot of what's called nature-based solutions. You can actually use natural systems to help protect against the consequences. For Ireland, one of the most significant consequences, now there's going to be a lot of very weird weather. We will have both very dry conditions and very wet conditions. That's hard to kind of imagine, but particularly in the south and east, it's likely the sort of droughts we had in 2018 to see more of. And that's why we will need water to the east to protect against that. But we will also have very intense rainfall events. Some of the ways we can manage that is, for example, in farming, change our grassland system to more deep-rooted grass systems, more mixed swards, and that holds the rain.
Okay.
And it also protects helps the farmers because that sort of pasture land is much more resilient to either drought or to heavy
Okay.
rain
So
conditions.
those are quite pragmatic things, and that's quite granular and
Yeah.
detailed. But I suppose a couple of things is I'm wondering, A, how we are going to afford it, but B, when you look, and there has obviously been lots of opinion polls lately in the run up to tomorrow's elections, it would appear that green issues and climate change is not one of the issues that most people are concerned with. The single biggest issue appears to be for people, 29% of people in the most recent poll I have seen are concerned about migration, which is also going to be, of course, affected by climate. 19% are concerned about housing. Climate change and green issues comes in at 3%. This is what people, that they believe it to be a pressing issue. That's a very small number of people.
It's the same in most countries and in most polls, and it's
It's
understandable.
dropping, though.
Well, yes, in the last 3 to 4 years, because the attention was on the likes of the war in Ukraine, the likes of COVID, and it's absolutely understandable. Our first priority is to house our people and to make sure we have a good health system and so on. But actually, going back to your conversation with Shane there earlier, are we civic minded in this country? I think we are. And I think part of that civic mindedness is actually we are concerned about protecting the future for our children and having a healthy environment. And Irish people actually, I think we're as good as the Danes, if not better, in terms, if you really ask the question, yes, they'll ask you, what's your immediate concern for this week? But are Irish people concerned that we are destroying the natural environment upon which all our security depends? Yes, they are. And it doesn't vary between rural and urban, or rich and poor, or young and
Although there
old.
does appear to be, at least anecdotally, and again, and I know that people say the only opinion poll that counts is the actual one on polling day, but that in rural Ireland, the green agenda, if you want to call it that for want of a better word, is viewed with skepticism and indeed a degree of pushback that they fear that you are coming as the Greens for their way of life and they don't like it.
Yeah, change is not easy. I'm always quoting Woodrow Wilson, the former US president. If you want to make enemies, change things. And in adapting and in stopping climate change, we do have to change things. We have to change our food and our farming system, yes. We have to change our energy system. We have to change our transport system. We have to change towards a circular economy. We have to start living within the limits that the planet sets. Now, that change isn't easy, but actually, I think firstly, how we go about that, we instead of wagging our finger telling people what to do, we do need to ask for people to help. And we do have to set out a new way of doing things which is actually better. You won't just stop people saying,
Okay.
you have to stop doing this, and it's a punitive, it's a hardship posting. It does have to, what we have to deliver, and it's bottom up as well as top down, is a different way of doing things that reduces the pollution, but gives us the
Okay.
protection, the security, the prosperity that we need.
Couple
And
of
I
thi-
think that is possible.
A couple of things I want to get to before I let you go, Minister. Front of the Irish Times this morning, referendum risked legal uncertainty for migration rules, officials cautioned. This is the story that that your minister, Roderick O'Gorman, was warned that there could be issues if the referendums were passed around things like migration, even though what was being said publicly to the public in the run-up to the referendum was that was not an issue, but he was being advised at the same time as that it was. The government goes on a lot about misinformation and disinformation and how to combat it. It could be construed that you yourselves are guilty of it with stuff like this.
I read that article this morning, and I have the highest regard for Arthur Beasley, the author, but it's strange because actually, if you read down the bottom of the article, that advice was given prior to the wording finally being concluded. So it was hypothetical to a certain extent. It wasn't based on the wording that was being presented. But can I go back? And listen, the people voted on that. The people are sovereign in our country. So the vote was overwhelmingly
But you see
against
what
the
I'm saying about
wording.
misinformation?
Well, I don't think there was any misinformation. That I mean, the motive there in government was to try and modernise our constitution so that it wouldn't uh, discriminate on the basis of gender, and also to try and promote caring in our society. Now, the the government clearly lost that vote overwhelmingly, so you accept that, and it'll be up to a future government to come back.
All right, so
But there wasn't any
all right,
intention
so
to misinform.
a couple of other very brief things. The issue around restricted breeds of dogs. A tragic incident has occurred in the last 48 hours in Ireland. I think everyone is very shocked by it. And I know that there is a committee sitting and that they will have to give findings. But do you have a personal view on dogs like those Bully XLs, whether or not people should be allowed to own them as pets when they have clearly killed many people, including their owners, and are quite a dangerous breed?
I do have a personal view, and I hear with respect to all the experts who say you shouldn't ban, but I do question. I personally, I'd be supportive of us restricting banning such breeds because it's not just that they're a threat to their owner; it's they're a threat to the community. I mean, literally a threat in the sense that when you're walking down a side,
Yeah.
path, and you see that type of dog coming at you, you're scared. And I'm thinking, well, why are we terrorising people in our community? So
Yeah.
I would be in the more restrictive end because I don't think it's fair to people in a community that you've got that presence.
And very lastly, how do you think you're going to do tomorrow?
I hope we'll do well, but that'll be up to the Irish people. It's been a good campaign. We haven't had an election in 4 years. For the political system, it took a while everyone to crank up again. But actually, we have a strong democracy. It's the heart of our political democratic system to participate. It's a civic, it's a Republican thing to vote and to ask for the vote. And so I think
Will there be a
actually,
Green in Europe?
I hope so. I hope there'll be more than one.
Minister for Environment, Climate and Communications, Eamon Ryan, thank you very much for joining us.